Good evening, everyone. Today we're going to talk about gross domestic product. We're in chapter 10, section 1 here. And today we're going to be plunging into macroeconomics. Macroeconomics looks at how an overall economy is doing, how an entire nation's economy is doing. And when economists take a look at macroeconomics, they use what are called national income and product accounts, NIPAs, to track a nation's economy and to see how it's doing. This tracking process is called national income accounting, and the most popular national income account is gross domestic product. Probably the closest synonym for gross domestic product would be production. And when a nation has higher gross domestic product, that means that that nation will have a higher standard of living. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the definition of gross domestic product. So gross domestic product, also known as GDP, is the most widely used national income product account. And the definition is this: is the total dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a country during one calendar year. So good synonyms for that would be production, would be output, but gross domestic product has a very specific definition. First of all, it's the total dollar value. So the gross domestic product is expressed in dollars of all final goods and services. So there are a couple types of goods and services. You have final goods and services, which are the final product itself. And then you have what are called intermediate goods, which are the parts of that product. Okay, only final goods will count. You don't want to double count both final and intermediate goods. So for example, if a car is included in gross domestic product, that would be a final good. But the parts of the car, say the tires, if they were included in the car, would not be included in gross domestic product, because then you are counting both the car itself as well as the parts of the car in gross domestic product, and you are double counting, and that will make gross domestic product look higher than it actually is. So we're not going to count intermediate goods, the parts of things. We're only going to count that final product. Okay, so it's the value, the total dollar value of all final goods and services produced. Okay, this is a geographic, we're not looking at, before we get to that, we're not looking at sales, we're looking at production. How much is produced? You can sell things multiple times in a year, but you will produce it only once. Okay, within a country, well, this is a geographic designation. If something is made in the United States, it's included in U.S. gross domestic product. If it's made in Japan, it's included in Japanese gross domestic product during one calendar year. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples here. Let's say if Nintendo, which is a Japanese company, is building Wii's in the United States, it is going to be a part of gross domestic product because they are making it in the United States. But if you have Walmart, let's say Walmart is producing goods in Japan. Walmart might be an American company, but if they're producing goods in Japan, it's not going to be included in US GDP because it's not made within the United States. So once again, we're looking at a geographic designation. So let me give you another example of a final versus an intermediate good. So let's say you have a dining table, and then you have the legs of the dining table. The dining table itself, because it is a final good, would be included in gross domestic product. The legs of the table would not, because that is an intermediate good. That is something that is going to be put on the dining table. You don't want to double count, so therefore, only the dining table itself would be included. Okay, so growing gross domestic product is good for an economy, and in the United States, GDP numbers are huge. in the trillions of dollars. Now, next we're going to look at how gross domestic product is calculated. And it's calculated using something called the output expenditure model. And that says this: GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So all those variables mean something, and we're going to talk about what they mean in a second. So 4 sectors of the product market combine to make up gross domestic product. C is consumer purchases, okay, personal consumption expenditures, okay, what people are buying. 70% of our economy is, or 70% of US gross domestic product is consumer purchases. Okay, we as a nation are very much a nation of consumption. Gross investment, that is I, okay, that's the total value of all capital goods. So when we're talking capital goods, we're talking tools and technology and so forth, produced in a nation during 1 year, as well as changes in the dollar value of business inventories. So if companies produce things and are holding it in inventory, that would be included in gross investment there. So capital goods being produced, as well as business inventories in which goods are being held by the company itself. Then finally, you have government purchase of goods and services. That's G. Okay, so this would be another way to say G is G stands for government spending. So if the government spends money on defense, education, highways, that kind of stuff would be included in gross domestic product under G, government spending. And 4 is net exports. Remember, an export is something that leaves a country and goes to another country. Okay? So if the United States is exporting something, that means we're making it here and then we're shipping it out. Okay, so net exports of goods and services is calculated as exports minus imports, or X minus M. And net exports is actually something that actually drags down U.S. gross domestic product, because we have a large trade deficit with many nations, especially China. All right, so it's really important that you can understand the 4 sectors, the 4 variables there that make up gross domestic product. Now, gross domestic product, guys, does have to be adjusted for price increases. So gross domestic product is calculated in 2 ways. You have nominal GDP. This is current GDP, or GDP expressed in the current prices of the period being measured. It's not adjusted for inflation when prices are going up, or deflation when prices are going down. It's in current prices. Okay, then you have real GDP, which is GDP adjusted for price changes. It's really important that you adjust things for price changes if you're going to compare numbers over time. Take, for example, Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind back in 1939 made about $200 million. And that's not all that much by today's standards, but that is a nominal number. That is not taking any kind of price changes into account. If you are to adjust that $200 million to today's dollars, Gone with the Wind would be making over $1 billion. It would be a wild success. It would be one of the highest grossing films of all time. So because of that, you can see the importance of real numbers, numbers that are adjusted for inflation, dollar numbers that are adjusted for deflation. Okay, so real gross domestic product, where GDP is adjusted for price changes, is the most watched form of GDP that economists will take a look at. That's what they care about. They want to adjust things for price changes. Then finally, you have price indexes. Price indexes will basically convert you from nominal to real GDP. So a price index is a set of statistics that allows economists to compare prices over time and measures changes in prices over time. So you can convert real GDP to nominal GDP and go back and forth there. All right, so let's take a look at some limitations. There are definite limitations of gross domestic product, and economists argue about this all the time, about how accurate actual gross domestic product numbers are. First is the accuracy and timeliness of data. Gross domestic product numbers use sampling techniques. It's a slow process, and because of that, there's always a little bit of error in gross domestic product numbers. It doesn't count non-market activities. So if you're cleaning your room or you have a stay-at-home mom, something that where somebody's producing something, but they're not actually selling that thing, that is a non-market activity, and that would not be counted. Anything produced and sold in the underground economy, guns, drugs, all that kind of stuff, that would not be included in gross domestic product because the government does not know necessarily that's happening. How can they keep track of those numbers? And then finally, you have goods and bads. So there are some good things like protecting the environment that can temporarily lower gross domestic product, but that trade-off is worth it. All right, so on the left there, you see a stay-at-home mom, which would be an example of a non-market activity, and then you have pollution on the right there, which would be an example of goods and bads. All right, so let's take a look here at a couple of questions. For number one, which of the following is not a component of gross domestic product? And number two, which type of gross domestic product is adjusted for price increases and decreases? I'll give you a few seconds for that. Okay, so for the summary, go ahead and describe for me the components of gross domestic product and as well as its limitations. All right, so I'll let you do that and I'll check those notes and we will go ahead and go from there. I hope you all have a fantastic evening. Bye-bye.